Hello everyone, Mr. Miller here. So we're going to work through this assignment, which is Effects of Changes in Ecosystems Part 1. Okay, so as we've learned previously, ecosystems are delicate balances of plants, animals, producers, consumers, all living together in a very specific place with very specific conditions. And just one small change to an ecosystem can have a huge impact on all the other organisms in that ecosystem. So these questions are all about how when you make a change in one part, it affects all the other parts. So in this question, we have an Alaskan ecosystem here with all of the animals and producers that are in this ecosystem. Okay. So the question is, an environmental change that removed which of these organisms from the ecosystem would cause the most instability in the ecosystem? So the question is, if which one of these animals or organisms, may not be an animal, which one of these organisms, if we removed them, would have the biggest impact on the entire ecosystem? They will all have some impact. You can't change the food web and not have some impact. But the question is, which one would have the biggest impact? So the change that would have the biggest impact is if you took out the producers. So the biggest impact you could possibly make would be to take out the phytoplankton in this case, because remember, the phytoplankton are at the base of the food web. This is where the food chain starts, okay? So if it starts here, remember the arrow always points towards the eater, so these phytoplankton get eaten by the eater, which is zooplankton. And the zooplankton serve as a food source for everything else. So if you were to remove the phytoplankton, then the zooplankton would die out. And if the zooplankton died out, then everything that eats the zooplankton would die out. And then everything that eats the things that ate those zooplankton would also die out, right? So phytoplankton, however, is not one of the options. So the next best thing is the zooplankton. So the ones that will have the biggest impact are going to be at the bottom if you were to remove them. Okay, it's like removing the base of a pyramid. If you remove the base, the whole thing falls apart. So always look toward the bottom when you have questions like this. So phytoplankton is not an option, but the next thing up, zooplankton, is an option. So that one is the furthest one toward the bottom. It's furthest towards the base of the food chain. So that is going to have the biggest impact if you were to remove those. All right, so this question tells you about a salamander, which lives in the San Marcos area. It's found only in a lake called Spring Lake and a portion of the San Marcos River. Which human activity would most likely decrease the ability of the salamanders to survive? In other words, which human activity would most likely kill the salamanders? Well, what do the salamanders need to live? They need this water from the Spring Lake and the San Marcos River to live. So clearly, and that's the only information we're given. So obviously, it's going to have something to do with the water. If humans were to somehow negatively impact the water supply, that would have a detrimental effect to their survival. So which one of these answer choices says something about how humans are messing with the salamander's water supply? Whatever that is, that's going to be the answer. Okay, so read the answer choices and tell me which one has to do with humans interfering with the salamander's water supply. Okay. In the mid-1980s, an aggressive strain of algae known as Caulerpa was accidentally introduced into the Mediterranean Sea when a seaside aquarium cleaned out its tanks. The algae contains a toxin that prevents native herbivores from consuming it. Caulerpa quickly spread over the seafloor, crowding out many species, including sponges, corals, sea fans, and lobsters. Which statement explains the most likely impact that Caulerpa has had on the biodiversity in the Mediterranean Sea? So remember, biodiversity is the diversity of life. That means you have a lot of different types of living things there. So this algae, it was accidentally introduced to this ecosystem that it's not native to. And so it took over completely. And not only did it take over all of the original organisms that were there, but also fish are unable to eat this algae. So what impact do you think this algae, which took out all the other living things that were currently there and killed the fish that were trying to eat it, what impact do you think that that algae had on the diversity of living things in that sea? Obviously, it would have a negative impact on the diversity, right? So tell me which one is the answer to that. All right, scientists have observed many types of tropical fish moving beyond their traditional ocean ranges into waters that have historically been more temperate. These fish compete for food with native fish, consuming much of the kelp forests and beds of seagrass, which is food. So basically, these tropical fish lived in one area. It got too hot, so they moved out of that area that they're native to into cooler areas, and they started eating up all the food that was originally for the fish that were already there in the new area. So these new guys, these new tropical fish moved in and ate up all the food that these other fish had been eating. The question is, why did that happen? Why did the tropical fish leave the hot water to go to the colder water? Well, you tell me. A, B, C, or D? All right. The picture shows a pica, a small mammal found in grassland ecosystems. The vast grasslands are home to the Plateau Pica, which is this guy right here. The numerous picas are prey for many predators of the grasslands. So that's one thing that these picas do. Let's keep track of what the picas do in this ecosystem. Serving as a food source is something, so they do serve as a food source for their predators. Okay, so they're a source of food. That's one thing that they do. Let's keep reading. The watershed drains large quantities of groundwater during the rainy season or the monsoon season. A watershed is just a place where a lot of water runs off of it into like a river or a lake. Okay, it's just a place that drains water. Picas have extensive burrows that help drain the groundwater rapidly and are used as nesting sites by many bird species. Okay, so there's two more things there. So not only do the picas serve as a food source, but they also burrow these holes in the ground, and those holes in the ground help to drain the water, and they keep the area from flooding. So they help drain groundwater, and those nests also serve as a home for some birds. So those are three things that the pica does. However, many advocate the eradication of them because they compete with livestock for grass. So the question asks, which of these will most likely happen if the plateau picas are completely removed? So if we wiped out these picas, what would happen? Well, we just talked about what three things the picas did. If you wiped them out, obviously those three things would not happen. What are the three things? Again, they serve as a food source for their predators. They help to drain groundwater, with the holes that they burrow, and they help create homes for nesting birds. If you take them out, none of that happens. So, which answer choice, A, B, C, or D, says that those three things would stop happening? All right, and the last one. Which of the following is most likely to cause the greatest disruption to an ecosystem? The greatest disruption, okay? All of these changes, any small change, causes a change in the ecosystem. But the question is, which one of these would be the biggest change, would cause the greatest disruption in the ecosystem? Well, let's read all the answer choices. A says emptying an aquarium containing non-native species into a local waterway. B, cutting down a small cedar tree to make holiday decorations. C, cleaning the windshield of a car with an alcohol-based glass cleaner. Or D, mowing the lawn in a city park. Well, like I said, all of these might have a change, but which one would have the biggest? So, mowing a lawn in a city park. Well, a city park is probably not that diverse in life. There's probably not that many different living things living there. It's probably full of people. There's kids running around playing. It's a city park. It's a playground. There's not going to be a wide variety of living things there. So mowing the lawn there probably won't have a huge impact on the life that exists there, because there's probably not much life that exists there to begin with. Cleaning the windshield of a car with an alcohol-based cleaner. Well, while that may have a very tiny effect on the ecosystem, I don't think that that's going to be the biggest effect on an ecosystem. Cutting down a small cedar tree to make holiday decorations. Well, if we're just cutting down one small tree, and it is a change, that is a change, but as far as the size of that change, it's probably not that big of a change either. If you were cutting down hundreds of trees or thousands of trees, that would be a big deal. But just one small tree, probably not that big of a deal. Or A, emptying an aquarium containing non-native species into a local waterway. So here we're introducing these species that don't normally live in this area. So the species that do normally live in that area, that are native, they now have these new people who have moved in and are messing things up for them. They're competing for food supplies, they're competing for water, they're competing for space, they're competing for everything. So that would probably have a pretty big impact, I would say. So, but you tell me, A, B, C, or D. And that's the last question. So I hope this helped you. I know I didn't give you the answers necessarily, but I tried to lead you down the path so that you could find the right answer yourself.